As you know, the last couple of weeks here in Boston have made us the lead story and focus of news around the world. And we're very grateful to be starting to return to some semblance of normalcy. We look forward to hearing your thoughts about this story as someone who has covered issues of terrorism for years. You are truly a model for our students here at Tufts. I'm especially pleased to welcome you to campus now because for the first time in recent history, and perhaps ever, all of the top editorial positions at all of our campus publications, as well as top managers at our student television and radio stations, are held by women. It is a pleasure to introduce you to someone, as someone who is well known to my generation and beyond for her hard-hitting news reporting on CNN and ABC, and to my students, not only for your reporting, but also for your appearances in films such as Iron Man 2 and on television shows such as The Gilmore Girls. As you said, you get in there, show them what you've got, and the rest will take care of itself. You've shown us for years that you've got what you've got, and we are so honored to welcome you here today.
Were you still living in Iran? Was your family still there as you started to see family, friends go to jail and get executed?
Yes.
And that was the precipitous moment to move to London?
Yes. I was there throughout the whole of 1978, which was when the whole revolution and the system started to collapse and the revolution started to gain momentum. My parents were there and they did not have the wherewithal to leave. A lot of people saw and read the tea leaves and got out, people who had means and who could. My parents just decided not to, plus we didn't have property and houses and this and that outside Iran. Our life was in Iran. And we were not wealthy. I mean, we lived a very nice middle class. My father was very, very well connected, so we lived better than our means because of my father's great connections with everybody in power. But I stayed until practically the last minute, and I remember, and this documentary that I did in 2000 was really, it was about the reform movement under President Khatami and the moment of hope in Iran that came during 1997. But I went back because there, I remember my father in the summer of 1978, when the world was still hoping that the revolution would not succeed, saying to me that it's all over. This was in the summer of 1978, a full 9 months before it was over. And he said that nothing will be the same again. I remember he had tears in his eyes, and I was not politically active or aware, so it was a real learning experience. I eventually left under my father's instructions in 1979, January, to try to go and further my education, but that was when Khomeini came back. So they stayed a bit longer. People all of a sudden started turning up dead, people who we knew well and who I grew up respecting. So again, my whole worldview was being turned on its head. People who I believed were good people were now being shot and imprisoned, and I was being told they were the worst people in the world. So, this is a rude awakening to the world's realities. But I had the clarity and the age, I was about 20 at the time, to know that this was a crystallizing event for me. And I had been able to watch this revolution unfold and was old enough to appreciate what was going on and learn. And then I decided this is what I want to do. I want to be able to, what I don't want to do is ever be a victim of this kind of thing. And I want to be in there and be able to tell the stories and somehow use this as my future. So I chose journalism, and I chose to come to the United States for that reason.
How did you choose Providence? What was the decision?
Well, I was in London, to be very frank, and I hope I'm not speaking sort of out of turn or anything, but there was this little college in Fleet Street, which to this day I don't really know whether it was a real college or for students, trying to get visas or whatever. But in any event, my sister had been the one who applied to this college. And then she didn't want to continue to do journalism. So I had to go and see if I could beg them to give us the money back, because, you know, we were existing without, you know, much help, and we had to work, and anyway, whatever. I wanted to get the money back, and they said, no, you can't, I'm sorry. So I said, well, I'm not going to waste this money, I'm going to take her place. So I finished off the semester there, or the term there, and then I knew that in order to try to have a chance at making it in the world, I needed to come to the United States of America.
1983, you hear of a network called CNN,
Yeah.
and a gentleman by the name of Ted Turner.
Yes.
What was your first impression?
Well, I recall having a college counseling and job counseling sort of session, and the person leading that mentioned this network. But I thought it was so far out of the realm of the possibility, and I didn't really concentrate on that as much as doing what the conventional thing was, which is to try to send out, you know, resumes and desperate pleas to all the stations and networks around the United States. Of course, I got absolutely nowhere. A, because I had no experience and I was aspiring up, and B, because of the way I looked and sounded and talked, which was not the conventional wisdom at the time. Every woman on television at that time was blonde, spoke with a very, you know, Midwest accent, very sort of universal appeal. And I really didn't fit that bill at all. So I could not go and do the traditional, you know, career route, which was start at a small station and move your way up. So in 1983, having been hired by WJAR as a technical operative there, they were really kind to me. The people there were so kind, and I owe them such a huge debt of gratitude. The news director, the head of the investigative team, who's still going strong, Jim Terracani, who I credit with all my early, you know, endeavor. They said, hey, you know, we've heard about this thing called CNN. And more to the point, we've heard British accents come out of there. You know, and even more to the point, one of our top directors went down there and was one of the sort of early startup guys down there. So why don't we call him and see if there's a chance? So I said, that sounds great. And I was beginning to recall this, you know, career counseling that we all had, Ted Turner, CNN, this and that. And so they called me up, or I called them, they called me, and they recruited me on the phone. And that involved asking me 10 questions, one of which was, what is the capital of Iran? So I kind of aced that one. And I got my foot in the door, and, you know, again, totally junior. I don't really know how it works these days with startups, but with entry level, but I was lower than entry level, and you didn't get flown anywhere. You just didn't. So I had about $100. I had my bicycle, I had a suitcase, and I went to Atlanta. And and I got there, and I was meant to do a technical job. But then, when I got there, what I really wanted to be was a foreign correspondent. When I got there, the head recruiter said to me, oh, you're foreign. We got a sudden vacancy on the foreign desk. You go there. So I did. And that was great, because from there, I started really, really low, and then just methodically, systematically, gradually, eternally kept doing what I had to do to keep, you know, moving ahead.
As one of the early reporters at CNN, and with your colleagues at the time, and maybe there's a similar view if you talk to people at MTV, did you think it was going to work? Did you think that Ted Turner was really onto something?
Well, again, it all started in 1980, which was slightly before I came, well, it was around the time I came to college in the US. Ted was roundly laughed off the stage, as you all probably remember. He was actually almost, they tried to blacklist him on CNN from even covering the White House, the unions, because Ted was not a union, he was a right-to-work state, and CNN couldn't have survived otherwise. And most people did not think it would survive. And we, who were the, you know, kind of the workforce, the factory workers, for us that was our graduate school. Very few of us, of my generation, had gone to graduate school. We believed that this was graduate school on the job, and that hopefully would lead to somewhere in, you know, in a real network. And, you know, it lasted, and it became a real network. My first international assignment was, well, as a producer, I went with Richard Roth, who's now a UN correspondent based in New York, to cover the last of the falling East European dominoes. As communism and the Iron Curtain fell, Romania was the last one. And I just was sent out there as a producer for Richard. And then a few months later, they decided to offer another correspondent, much more senior to me, a job that was open as a foreign correspondent in Europe. And nobody wanted to take it. And I decided that I would just lobby for it, even though nobody had offered it to me. And I just pushed and pushed and pushed, and nobody else wanted it. And again, it was kind of dead man's shoes. So I got the job, and it was great. Didn't really want to be in that particular city. But within 2 months of me arriving there, and not yet having got an apartment or anything, Saddam Hussein did my career the great favor of invading Kuwait. And again, there was no good reason why I should have gone out, because I was very, very junior. But I really wanted to go. And I called up the desk and I said, I'm ready, I've got my team, we can go. And thank you very much, but you know, we've got all the plane tickets and we've assigned X to Baghdad and X to Saudi Arabia and X to here and there. So I said, all right. And then I quickly booked some tickets, and sure enough, the desk called back and said, get on the plane now! We can't get the others there. I don't know, plane connections or whatever, just my route was the quickest route. So we got to Dubai, and then again, the rest is history. CNN built up more and more people. We flooded the zone everywhere, and I think it is by general consensus that CNN won the Gulf War. Really, 100%. 100%. And we did it because we were hungry, we were eager, the network exploded onto the international stage at the same time as the Gulf War. And it was a remarkable success. And it was the first time that this kind of, well, first of all, there were months of diplomacy, as you remember, and we had it all live, and you had Gorbachev talking to Baker, and you know, people going to Saddam Hussein and Tariq Aziz, and you know, President Bush and Margaret Thatcher. I mean, just so much going on live television. And then when it came to the war, we had this unbelievable set of, you know, the bosses in Atlanta, coupled with Robert Wiener, who was one of the best field producers ever, cobbled together this system whereby, if, as everybody expected, Saddam Hussein would shut down the media in Baghdad, we had this system that allowed us to broadcast, at least by voice, when the satellite was taken down. And that's how Bernie Shaw, John Holloman, and Peter Arnett delivered the Gulf War to the world. And that was just amazing.
You have reported from every hotspot on this planet. And you've spent more time on the front line than most people in the military. You've commented and you quoted as saying that you spent almost every day of your life living in repressed fear. What does that mean?
Well, and I'd like to recognize Casey Murrow here. I said that at a Murrow lecture at RTNDA, but especially to recognize Casey and what we're doing here in this Murrow forum, because what Edward R. Murrow did for his profession was take war reporting to another level, and to really bring war reporting into people's homes and into their living rooms, with his radio reporting from Trafalgar Square, most importantly during the Blitz, and then, you know, when he saw Buchenwald and when he saw so many other things towards the end of the war. That was very scary. People lived in fear, and I became acquainted with real fear in my first, what I call, Murrow kind of war, which was Bosnia. It wasn't the Gulf War. The Gulf War was a big set piece, armies facing off against armies, 500,000 forces gathered by the United States and its allies, you know, battalions, you know, tanks and artillery and, you know, just everything against Saddam's forces, and it was played out on a battlefield, and we sort of followed from behind and watched. But like in the Blitz, like in many of the World War II battlefields, like in Bosnia, so many of the battles are fought in towns and villages and in farmland. And the real fear is when you are reporting that, you are not an observer standing anywhere at the side. You are an observer who happens to be inside with the civilian population, and therefore you are at equal risk as the civilian population. And so to do that day after day, week after week, year after year, builds up a massive reservoir of repressed fear. Because if you don't repress it, you can't do your job. So you have to manage the fear, and you can't pretend you're not afraid, because that would be foolish and it would be a lie. Everybody is afraid in those kinds of situations. And so it was about managing it. It was about managing it and figuring out, how to summon up the adrenaline and the intuition and the sixth sense that you develop over many years to stay safe. And I'm always touching wood when I say that, because genuinely I believe I've been lucky that, so many of my friends and colleagues have been killed and wounded, starting in Bosnia and continuing to this day, where in Syria, which is the latest of the worst of the battlegrounds for journalists, in the last year I've lost, our profession has lost, my colleagues have lost, their families and friends have lost some of the greatest journalists around.
Well, you commented, just to put some statistics on your last thought, 14 journalists alone in this year, and we're only halfway through the year,
Syria
have been killed. Yeah. And 979 have been killed since the early 90s.
And I would say that I'm on the Committee to Protect Journalists, and I'm sure many people are familiar with it. Every year, they show that journalists are being killed more and more, but the leading cause of death amongst journalists now is deliberate. It's murder, which is completely skewed from the rest of the general population. Journalists are mostly murdered. That's how we die, because people want to shut us up. People don't want to hear the truth, and they are willing to go to any length to make sure that the truth doesn't get out. So not just American journalists and Western journalists going abroad to cover these countries, but the local journalists in those countries are deliberately targeted, and it happens in Russia, in the Philippines, in Syria, of course, in Mexico, and everywhere you look.
This notion of finding the truth is very appropriate at the Murrow Forum, because that was one of Edward R. Murrow's mantras, was that the truth is so important. In your career, finding the truth has allowed you, in your words, to say that you're the eyes and the ears of your viewers.
I don't just say that about myself. I say it about all of us who've gone into this profession, because especially now, that's kind of a no-brainer. That's sort of self-evident back in the Murrow generation, or even in the generation just before mine. But now, as you know, there is so much, and we've talked about it endlessly, but the proliferating platforms, the social media, the relentless march of opinion into what I believe should be a fact-based reality, and the space reserved for facts and factual reporting, that it's even more incumbent upon us now to be the eyes and ears as a profession, as professional journalists, and to get up off our seats and to go to those places, to be able to bring back the reality of what's going on there, so that we don't just, and that we do it in our professional way. We're trained journalists, and we presumably have a duty to cross-reference, to check, to be able to verify sources, and to bring back real information and real human stories from wherever it is that the stories are happening. And while nobody's going to be able to put any genie back in the bottle, nor should one, but you cannot just rely on armchair analysis and just on thrice removed social media to give you your first-hand information. You can't even rely on social media / activism that's first-hand for instance, in Syria, because everybody has an agenda. So it puts a huge and increasing burden on those of us who believe in gathering the truth and the facts to do so, because it's so easy these days to have just the whole space flooded by all sorts of information that's not verified and is often wrong in the first instance.
Do you see the future Christiane Amanpours, maybe some that are
Yes,
sitting
of
here right
course.
now? Do you see them having the same rigor, the
Well, I
same
hope so.
discipline, the same desire to be telling the truth as you've shown in your career over the past 35 years?
All I can tell you is this, that I judge the Livingstone Awards, which are for journalists 35 years and under. So that's the younger spectrum. And I see unbelievable reporting from all over the country. And there's certainly unbelievable reporting in many college newspapers and college television stations and radios as well. So frankly, yes, I do. And I think that the younger you are, the more idealistic you are. And the challenge is to keep that youthful ideal and the mission and the commitment and the passion, and to know that truth is your master and nothing else. That's the challenge, to keep it as you keep going forward. And one of the problems is this desire for access, and that has I believe, a chilling effect on the ability to constantly hold power accountable and speak truth to power. I often wonder how journalists who are assigned to the White House and who broadcast from the garden there can really forget that actually their masters are looking over their shoulders from inside the
Literally.
White House and often trying to tell them how they want a story spun. And I just feel that this is not a popularity contest. This is really a profession where you actually kind of don't want to be liked. You've got to be you've got to hold people accountable, and sometimes that is very, very uncomfortable.
The terror that you covered around the world has now once again sadly hit our shores, as everybody here knows. And in conversations with Dr. Monaco before we started, we were hearing about the challenge of keeping, in this particular instance, the community informed and getting information from the CNNs of the world, trying to stay ahead of social media. CNN was criticized a bit for some of their coverage. The Daily News was criticized because they ran a doctored picture on the front page of the Daily News. How do you weigh all of the issues of wanting to report, check your sources, but knowing that people are desperate for immediate information?
I think there's additional pressure. CNN raised the bar by being 24/7, 30 plus years ago. And now you have an increased pressure, which is the social media, which is more than 24/7. I don't know. I mean, it's just, even I can't keep up with all of that stuff, and that's my job to keep up with it all. I think you have to take a deep breath and remember you're journalists. You do the same thing, which is to check and recheck and make sure your sources are correct, and just keep putting those brakes on yourself, and to insist that they do so in headquarters as well, and allow you the space to be able to report and to verify and then be able to deliver it. Yeah.
I just want to get your view on an issue that comes up when you're talking to somebody as accomplished as you that is a female. And Julie mentioned the top people that are running the news service here are all females. You initially didn't think that you would have a family, and now you're married, you have a son. And did that all change your view of being on the front line? And then the whole notion of wanting it all, and then a lot of female executives or females who have been successful say, yes, I want it all, but sometimes you can't get it all at the same time.
It's a big issue, obviously. Look, I grew up in Iran in a patriarchal society, And yet I never once felt that there was anything that I couldn't do because I was a woman. That was never communicated to me, ever. So I guess first and foremost is what you learn literally from the moment of your mother's milk. I mean, what you learn out of the cradle. How do your parents socialize you? How does your community, you know, how do you act in your community? And then, I mean, I just never ever thought that it was ever going to be an impediment, and it never has been. For me, being a female in this profession, I believe has been a net plus and a positive, because particularly the things that I cover, which may seem like manly business, war and all the war toys, these days war is about women and children as well. And it's about societies in which often women have much more access than men, as counterintuitive as that sounds. In the Middle East, in many Islamic societies, I'm often the only one who's able to go into a hospital room or somebody's house or into the kitchen or whatever it is, because I'm the woman. And, you know, they often won't let males come in. So, all in all, whether it's getting top interviews and scoops, I got Hosni Mubarak. And I also go into the kitchen of the, you know, of the woman whose daughter has had acid thrown on her face, because I'm a woman. I didn't get Hosni Mubarak because I'm a woman. I got it. The last and only interview. I know that there's this ongoing debate about feminism and what it is and what it isn't. Many women of my generation said, our four sisters and four mothers have already fought this battle for us, and now we will continue gender neutral. That's okay, but I think we still have to realize, now all these years later, I started at CNN in 1983, it's now 2013, the fight isn't over yet. Women are still not paid equally, that's unconscionable. Equal pay for equal play. No reason why women should not be paid exactly the same amount for exactly the same, or doing their job better. Women are still not at the top of the executive structure in the news organizations, with very few exceptions, and certainly not in the TV news organizations. They need to be. Women must have, and this country must develop, if they want a healthy country and a healthy economy and a healthy community and healthy family lives, some kind of accessible, affordable, manageable childcare and flexible situations for women to be able to work in. Across the rest of the world, in many developed democracies, they do that. And that has a net positive effect on the whole country and the whole community and on the economy. Now, on the point of can you have it all the time? I'm not sure. I think I've had it all, and I think I've been very, very lucky. But I am very conscious of the fact that I did it in stages, that I was balls to the wall with my career when I was very young. I had the space and the desire to do that. That's all I did was work. I went to Bosnia, to Iran, to Iraq, to Rwanda, to Haiti, to Somalia, 24/7, with practically no rest. I mean, yes, I came back and forth, but that was all I thought about. That's all I wanted to do. There was nobody that I had to stay alive for. And I didn't have to think about that. So the youthful sense of immortality and invincibility and ambition and hard work, all of that was cool. And then I guess, I got to nearly 40 and I thought, actually it was a producer of mine, he said, so Christiane, you think you're going to spend the rest of your life going to bed with your awards? That's not going to be a very comfortable hug. No, but it got me thinking. And I think if you talk to, many women, there's no sort of straight line. Life is much richer and more difficult and more complicated for men and women. And we've just got to figure out how to live it and how to do it best, depending on what it is we choose to do and at what time. But we need to be able to make our own choices, and we need to be, so the conclusion of that was that I'm a late wife and late mother, and that being a mother filled me with the kind of fear that I never had when I was not. Because now I have somebody to stay alive for. And I want to. So it's very complicated for women. It's very, very complicated. But I do strongly believe that the time is over to treat women's issues as some kind of quaint, do-gooding, kind of thing, some kind of social experiment. We make up half the world. We make up more than half of university populations, more than half of graduates. We have a much higher, I believe, spending power. And it's time that we all leveraged our economic power and learned how to negotiate to get exactly what we want as fiercely as men know how to negotiate. And never, ever, ever, ever accept to be paid a penny less for equal work as your male colleagues. Ever.